You can't control the weather. There's things you can't control. So what can you control? You can control your attitude. You can control your belief system. You can control what you say every day. You can control your habits. So instead of me worrying about what I couldn't control, I focused on, okay, what can I control?
Welcome to the We.Are.Powerful podcast, celebrating the people and teams who make the changes in themselves to transform the results for others in the organizations and communities they are part of. I'm James Russell, an organizational change consultant and coach.
Hi everyone, my name is Alex Sellers. I'm the founder of Blue Heron Training. We're on a mission to help people and improve cultures wherever we go.
So look, we're going to be talking to some truly inspiring people with powerful stories to tell. So tune in, subscribe to make sure you get alerts when new episodes are released. So today we are talking to Hannah Oyewole, CEO and founder of the Young Ladies Club, a social enterprise that aims to raise aspirations in disadvantaged young women to achieve their education and career potential. I had a chat with some of the team at Young Ladies Club at the London Business Show last year, and I was blown away by the amazing impact Hannah and her team are having. Over 10,000 young women and girls that you've supported. So again, when I saw Young Ladies Club and I heard about what you do, Hannah, I just thought, well, let's get you onto the podcast, and would love to hear a bit more about your story.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Hannah, could you just tell us a little bit about how this all came to start? How did you come to sort of start all this up?
Yeah, so I grew up in a single parent home with 7 children in Hackney. That's pre-gentrification. And things are really tough then. I mean, you could hear of people being, murdered in the area. So crime was prevalent and there wasn't a lot of positive role models. And for me, I always knew from an early age, from the age of 8, I just felt like my life just had to be different. I just couldn't look like where I've come from. And I knew I wanted to make a positive change in my community as well. So at the age of 16, I went into my local community, into my church, and I looked up to mentors and role models that could help me become all that I wanted to be, to truly fulfill my potential. And I saw a lot of motivational speakers at the time, and I thought, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. I want to impact the next generation. I mean, I was still young myself, but I just had that burning desire. So I delved into a lot of personal development books. And, where I was previously failing in my university degree, I was able to achieve a first class. And that was the catalyst, really, that made me see that, if you really put your mind to it, you can achieve. And after I got my first class, I went on to set up the charity Young Ladies Club and then write my book, my personal development book, shortly after, 1 year after I Dare You. So it all kind of just unfolded that way.
You've raised up about 10 things I'd want to explore a little bit on that. So just sort of tracking back a little bit, Hannah, mark down 3 things when you were just speaking now. Role models. Maybe we can get into that in a bit.
Yeah.
So I just think the older I get, the more people I talk to, the more I listen, the more I realize how important role models are. And it's not something I gave credence to when I was young and I was that age. And I'd like to explore that later. Going back into this is a big drive for a 16-year-old, right? That's pretty young to be pushing that. Yeah. When you were that age, what did it look like? What did that change in that drive? How did that play through for you?
Yeah, so I think for me, my faith was a big cornerstone for me. So that was kind of what helped me. I have to give credit to my faith for pushing me in the right direction. So it was kind of easier that way. And so, once I had a clear focus, the next step, and I talk about this in the chapters of my book, the first chapter of my book is purpose. So it's, why am I here? What am I supposed to be doing? That's the next question that you have to ask yourself, and which I asked myself. And I wrote down goals. I wrote down sort of 10 points about what I wanted to achieve. I wanted to write a book. I wanted to get a first class. I wanted to be a motivational speaker. I wanted to do a TED talk. I had a lot of aspirations and dreams, and I sort of followed that through. I was focused and dedicated. And I think when you come from a challenging background where resilience is sort of the only thing that you can use to get you through, you don't see your age as a barrier. You don't see certain things as a barrier because all you have is that drive. So for me, it was just that inner drive that I had from an early age that kind of pushed me through to my dreams and goals.
And I'd like to explore a bit more, Hannah, about, I'm doing a lot of work at the moment to look at how our childhood, the family, the socioeconomic background that we're born into, how that has an influence on
Yeah.
how we see our potential future. And I'm really interested to explore a bit more about what you experienced when you were younger, what you see in some of the other people that come through Young Ladies Club. And
Yeah.
it'd be good to get into some of the, how can we choose a path that is right for us?
Yeah. I think positive thinking is so essential. I always tell people that statistically, I'm not supposed to be where I am, but you do have the power in your hands to change your life around. That's what you can control. So even in my book, I talk about the locus of control. You can't control the weather. There's things you can't control. So what can you control? You can control your attitude. You can control your belief system. You can control what you say every day. You can control your habits. So instead of me worrying about what I couldn't control, I focused on, okay, what can I control? And that was when I started the process of changing my beliefs, rewriting my, negative, blueprints, should I say. And I always take practical steps because people ask, well, okay, how did you do it? I literally took a sheet of paper down, split it into two. On one side, I wrote negative thoughts. On the other side, I wrote positive thoughts. All the negative thoughts that came to my mind, I wrote it down. I can't run this business. I'm going to fail in the first 5 years. Statistically, most businesses fail. Who do I think I am? And I began to just literally rewrite it with, well, I'm great. What if I fail? Well, what if I fly? And I would do this every day religiously until my mind started to change. And I started to move towards the possibilities and doors started to open. It's the corridor principle. As you move forward and you take action, because faith without works is dead. If you don't take the action, the faith is meaningless. So you've got to move forward. And lo and behold, the doors started opening. The first ever program I ran under Young Ladies Club was our boot camp. I had absolutely no money, but I went to a youth club in Islington and I said, look, if you give me your venue for free, I will offer our training program to your young people for free. So I had a minor charge for those that wanted to come from our group. And then I was learning how to negotiate from early, and the event was success. And I made our first 200 to 250 pounds from that. Then we continued from there. And then, Microsoft came knocking on the door. I went up to, an executive that worked for Microsoft at an event and I pitched the company and they said, oh yeah, we'd love to work with you. We did our first employability and skills program. Then they were so impressed. We did an employability and skills conference in their head office in Reading at the time. So I had nothing apart from belief and action.
And that's amazing, Hannah. And it'd be good to dig into some of that. And I listened to your TEDx talk and I was fascinating just based on what you said then around we can come from households and families and backgrounds where you talked about successful thoughts, but equally we can have those limiting beliefs. And I love the story that you told of being in an African household with your aunt and then you talked about encouraging failure. I just love to talk a bit more about those sort of competing, almost sort of pressures and expectations that we can grow up with.
Yeah. Well, I think when you come from, 7 children in any country is a lot. But I'm the middle child. And I think there is some studies around being a middle child because you've got 3 older, 3 younger. And it's like, you're almost not always seen. So you feel like, you kind of have to do more. But I've always had that sort of competitive, ambitious nature. So by virtue of growing up in a larger household than most, it kind of made me, stay competitive, stay hungry. And I use the analogy in my TED talk of like food, for example, you have a big bowl of rice in African households and a piece of meat or chicken. And all of us are kind of eyeing that up because we want that piece of the meat. And it's like, who's going to get it? So that probably shaped a lot of my, competitive abilities and definitely made me, want more in life. And, when you do come from lack and limitation, that also drives your hunger as well. I definitely credit sort of, my background to my success, definitely.
But you had to make a choice in there, didn't you? You had to choose that, okay, I'm going to have successful thoughts. I'm going to face into those limiting beliefs. I'm going to allow myself to fail, give myself permission to try and fail and keep moving forward. There must have been quite a lot of permission giving that you had to do for yourself back then. What
Yeah,
was,
that you're right, you know.
how do you bring that into the work that you do with the Young Ladies Club to support other people that are maybe going through similar experiences with those limiting beliefs?
I think our work is so impactful. And, you know, we work at the grassroots level, which is where I've come from. And I see myself as a positive role model for the young women that we're raising. I've come from struggle and I've come from poverty. I've come from disadvantage. I've come from limitation and lack. But I did something different. So we have a range of programs, from our mentoring program to our personal development program and our employability skills program, to provide the opportunities that I may not have had. We're now providing those opportunities for these young women to let them know that all it takes is a step. But the reason why we have our mentoring program is to help them build that self-esteem and confidence. Because sometimes the opportunity can be there, but if you don't believe that you actually deserve it, so this is a self-esteem issue. You know, if you don't believe you're deserving, if you don't see people that look like you in those positions, you automatically cancel yourself out. So the Young Ladies Club wants to create opportunities, wants to create representation, wants to create that can-do and win mindset for other young women to take that opportunity, which is happening. I mean, we've impacted thousands of young women and girls. We're still doing it years later, and it's so rewarding for me to see this and the change that has commenced as a result of the charity.
Have you got any examples, Hannah, of people that have gone through that journey and the difference that they've made for themselves and they've seen as a result?
Yeah, I mean, we did our mentoring program in Park High School. It was a 15-week program. We were able to take the young girls to Capgemini, to their head office in Holborn, and they were able to actually see women in the workplace, in tech. And one of the young girls' parents called us, you know, elated. She couldn't believe the change and the transformation that had occurred in her daughter in just 15 weeks. And it's phone calls like that that make us press harder and continue. And even our Violence Against Women and Girls program, you know, we provide wraparound support, we provide therapy, and the transformation and change, the knowledge, the information, the employment opportunity that we've provided for people that have been in really difficult, abusive situations has just been life-changing and fascinating. And this is just really purpose-driven. And I want to encourage the listeners that a lot of people sometimes are dependent on you taking that step. You know, there's a book that I read by Rick Warren, The Purpose-Driven Life. It's not always about you. It's not about you. It's about the people that you impact, change, and influence. I always think, if I didn't take that step, would I have created this influence? Would I have been able to take women out of poverty? Would I have been able to transform people from abusive households and domestic violence situations? It's more than just you. And when you have a strong why, everything else, you know, will take precedent after that.
Hannah, I'm keen to explore. There's two things I was hoping to explore with you, and just off the back of what you've just said. For anybody who's out there that's struggling with their why, anybody, and there's a lot of people out there that are drifting, I think, at the moment. What would you say to them? How can people go about? I know you gave us some techniques earlier, but what would you say to them about discovering and working on what their purpose might be?
So I think you need to just take some time out of your day, of your busy schedule. You may book a retreat or go to the park or get in nature, but you need to quiet your mind and your soul. These are the things that have worked for me. And you need to almost look at the woman or man in the mirror and really ask yourself some honest questions. You need to do some soul searching and some soul digging. Because I think there's so much busyness in the world. And I think sometimes we just need to be still and listen to what our inner heart is saying. And it's only when you confront yourself and you're honest with yourself that you can move from point A to point B to point C. And I also want to touch on forgiveness, forgiving yourself as well. Because a lot of people are hard on themselves. I had to forgive myself for a lot of things. And it was the forgiveness that was the catalyst for the permission. You may have to forgive yourself. You may have to forgive others. You may have to forgive you were brought up, the circumstances that you were raised in, and tell yourself, although it wasn't my fault, I forgive my parents for this, or I forgive myself for this, or I forgive my friend for this. And when you unlock forgiveness, it's like a load is taken off your shoulder. And there's a lot of research that talks about the power of forgiveness. And when you start there, you forgive yourself for your debt, your relationship breakdown, you take accountability for your life, then you now say, what's next? What's the next step? And now I've got a clean slate. What can I do now? This is my life. It's my responsibility. No one's coming to save you. And I cried for days when I did this exercise and this work. But it was like a burden was lifted off me. And within 2 weeks, I wrote my book. So my speed was so quick, because you can't move forward to the next level when you've got heavy loads and heavy weights holding you down. You've got to unload that, let it go, and then you can fly to the next level.
Hannah, that's I couldn't agree more with everything you've just said. It's fascinating for me, and it's really important for me. So I work a program of recovery. I've been doing that for about 7 years. Obviously, there's a lot of faith in there. You mentioned faith without works is dead. I think it's a phrase that I think it stems from John, is it, in the Bible? But yeah, and we use it in our program.
That's interesting.
It's really true. It's actually a phrase that it threads all the way through our program, right? But I think there's two elements to it, and you've touched on some really powerful stuff, Hannah, which I'm keen to explore, perhaps, for our listeners, if it helps. I think it's really easy these days to remain busy, isn't it? Everything is so fast. There's a lot of pressures on life, and it's very easy to kind of crowd out what is actually going on inside with all the other stuff, all the noise that happens. And I worry sometimes, and just reflecting on myself, I worry sometimes that can stop us from actually pausing and understanding and reflecting on what we are here to do. You said it's not about you, but we can't move forward until we stop, right? And that's my experience. There's so many things that we hold inside that sometimes I think we're not aware of, and we need to create that space, just to let that be, and be ready for what comes out of that. Start to maybe work towards that. And the final bit I wanted to pick up on there, and maybe explore a little bit more, is this idea of forgiveness. I believe that forgiveness is the central pin. I think without that, we can't move on because we hold on to stuff, and I think that then presents in other ways, right? So I'm really fascinated by that. And I think that I'd really love to hear a little bit more about how you kind of work with that every day, how you share that message to people. Because I'm sure that some people aren't quite ready to hear that strength.
Yes.
How do you work that on a daily basis, Hannah?
Yeah, so I talk about forgiving yourself. I mean, when it comes to others, forgiveness doesn't necessarily mean reconciliation. So that's really important. There's people I've forgiven, but I would not reconcile with them because maybe the relationship is not healthy, or, it's toxic, or it's abusive. So I want to safeguard that and bring that into perspective and reality, because people say, oh, just forgive. And it's not always that easy. And it took me a very long time to forgive even myself for certain things or for others. But I wrote letters, to said persons, and fleshed everything out, and then scrumpled up the letter after and threw it away. You don't necessarily have to post the letter to them. But these are all processes of letting go, and releasing the negative emotions that are stored up inside of you. So these are some of the practical things that I did and that had worked for me. But forgiving yourself, I think that's crucial and that's key. And that's the work that I've done a lot, in my line of work and for myself.
I need to come here because this is spooky, Hannah. I have a coach, and recently the coach made an observation, and then he said, James, you seem to have this kind of rupture repair cycle that you go through. And I had been describing a situation where new client, I felt like I'd maybe said something slightly wrong or not done it just right. And I then really was beating myself up about it, lots of sort of negative self-talk. And then I would go out of my way to try and repair things. But actually, from their perspective, there was nothing to repair. Your point around forgiveness and giving ourselves permission, and it's like, I'm 52 years old, and yet I am still beating myself up because I'm not being perfect and having perfect relationships and doing things in just the right way, saying just the right thing at just the right moment. And you've just talked about it, which is just be a little bit kind to yourself and stop
Yep.
expecting yourself to have to be perfect and say everything just right. We
Yeah.
are all imperfect beings, but that's what makes us who
Yep.
we are.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah, I totally agree. I struggled with, because when you tend to grow up, in households that tend to have like toxicity or a lot of criticism, you tend to be harder on yourself when it comes to your mistakes, and you tend to want to be a perfectionist or people pleaser. Early childhood is really key, particularly for children from the early years. We have an early years program, and for mothers who are pregnant, so from children age 0 to 5, because it's so crucial to ensure that the parents are supported and then the young children are supported, because everything in that age bracket matters a lot. What you say to your children, how they're raised, how they're developed. So due to the way I was raised in my background, I was excessively hard on myself, and it was very difficult for me to not be a perfectionist or be kind to myself. So I've had to learn self-compassion through my therapist, through my coach as well, James. So I kind of second exactly what you're saying. I struggled with that a lot. Catastrophizing as well in terms of my thinking, always going straight to the negative. So I had to do a lot of work on my mind, an extensive amount of work on my mind. And I'm still doing that work to be able to, reframe the negative blueprint.
And I discovered that, and this literally, I was doing this yesterday, day before yesterday, that I was confusing. It's really important that we're clear about our private life, our private role, and our work role, our professional role. And I realized I was confusing the
Yeah.
two, and what my needs are in my private life were coming into my work role. So rather than actually being just really focused on it in terms of my job and what I do, because it's not about me, it's about the client, I was bringing in all this other stuff
Yeah.
about what I needed. And literally, for anyone watching this, here is the kind of the little scribbled permissions and affirmations that I've written down and I've got here in my study, so that I can tune into it and actually focus in on, this is who I am, this is how I need to show up and be today.
Hannah, could you, just following on from all this, and it's sort of circling back to role modeling. We mentioned role modeling at the start, and if you could talk to some of the people watching or listening to the podcast, to people who might want to start exploring how they can be of service, we don't know where to start. What? Because I think there's a real lack of positive role. I think there's some amazing positive role models out there at the minute, but I think they're getting drowned out by perhaps some more negative role models.
Yeah.
If I'm honest, I think we live in
for
some
sure.
difficult times right now. Be politically careful now. Could you just explore how people could start to maybe, move into that? How they could start to be more of service if they're thinking about it?
Yeah, I think service is really important. I remember when I started out in my journey, I was just serving in my church. I was making myself available, volunteering. And that was kind of how I ended up in my leadership role and was able to see my leadership capabilities and abilities. So I think giving is very powerful, even if it's 2 hours of your time. Our mentoring program, we only ask for 2 hours of an individual's time weekly to give back to a young person. And you find that through giving back, through volunteering, through helping others, you suddenly are able to see your potential and see your capacity and see your capabilities. And I think that's kind of lacking sometimes in the world today. I think everyone sort of wants to, we kind of tend to kind of fall into a me, I culture and generation. But really, it's the coming togetherness, it's the community that really creates the catalyst for change. So that's kind of what has worked for me.
And for the role models and the mentors, Hannah, if people want to get involved or support, how can they do that? And what sort of people are you looking for?
Yeah, so you just go into our website, youngladiesclub.com, and just click on our mentoring program. And then it's got all the information in terms of how to sign up and get involved in our program. And we ask for individuals to come from the working world, if possible, so that they can offer work experience to the young people, so that they're not just getting information around, the steps that they took, but also what's possible for them. I think there's a real sort of underrepresentation for women in the STEM sectors. And so we do partner with a lot of STEM organizations, science, technology, engineering, and maths to kind of push women into that sort of workforce and sector as well. But we're open for anyone to come from any sort of background, finance, HR, marketing. As long as you've had sort of work experience, you can provide tips and tricks for young people to sort of develop themselves. And I think another thing I'll say for young people that are listening as well, I know that the job market can be quite challenging as well, but sort of like, I always think about initiative. And whenever I'm sort of hiring for employees in Young Ladies Club, I saw some of the most fascinating CVs, or I see the way individuals use their creativity and their initiative to sort of get my attention or the HR recruiter's attention. And it's fascinating. So that creativity, don't let it die. Even if you are looking for work, like, don't let that creativity die or that initiative die, because it would amaze you sort of how you can capture a recruiter's attention.
And Hannah, have you, going back sort of through your journey, and because I know you won't want to focus on like your achievements per se. That doesn't, you're not that kind of person. But for you have had some pretty significant achievements, and you've done some amazing stuff. And I can feel, and I'm sure the listeners can feel, the energy and the passion and the purpose. If you were to have some suggestions for people who are listening, who are stuck, who are struggling, I know you've talked a lot about purpose and a lot about forgiveness. But if you could have some suggestions around people who might be struggling with their own internal belief systems, they think they can't, or they don't know where they're going, or they feel oppressed, what would you talk to them about?
Yeah, I mean, that exercise that I did with the sheet of paper and dividing sort of positive belief, negative belief, and, writing down what is it that you're actually thinking about, or what is it that you actually believe about yourself. I can't do it, I'm worthless, really explore that and then sort of counteract that, because you need to overwrite those negative beliefs. And we do have a workshop that we do through our mentoring program with young women to help them overwrite that negative beliefs, to focus on their strengths and not necessarily their weaknesses. So exercises like that, positive exercises that can really help you unlock your true potential. And then look at positive individuals on YouTube or social media. So those that are in alignment with where you want to go, or those that you really find inspiring, because sometimes not everyone is able to afford maybe a mentor or a coach or a therapist. But we live in an information age. So there's a lot of good quality information that you can get from those that have sort of gone to where you want to get to. And you can kind of take motivation and inspiration from them. So these are the things that I did in my very early years when there was absolutely nothing. And I couldn't afford a mentor, and I couldn't afford a coach, and I couldn't afford a therapist. I had to just make do with what I had, with books, you know, just any way to sort of have sort of that guidance.
And I'll just build on that, Hannah. One of the techniques that I use in my coaching is to help people tune into what are those limiting beliefs, what are the kind of the coping behaviors, which can be exhausting because we're working so hard. Trace that back, and you talked about self-esteem and self-worth, and it's working out how do you replace those old coping behaviors with newer habits and practices that still almost give us that, it updates our map, it updates our script. We don't have to keep living by the old script. We can actually update it and give ourselves permission, build that self-worth and self-esteem so that we can operate and behave in a healthier way that actually gives us energy rather than drains us.
Yeah, so I have a wide range of techniques that I use, but I've crunched it down to maybe 3 now. So I meditate every morning for at least 10 to 20 minutes. I just have some free meditation, gratitude meditation videos that I use on YouTube. And then I have my visualization. So images are very powerful. I think people underestimate the power of images. So I have like a slideshow on my iPad with all the images, all the pictures of what I want to achieve and succeed. And I loop that like for the first 10 minutes. And then I do my affirmation. So I've written down my goals, but I speak in the present tense. So I am, I have. And I do, so that's sort of my formula every morning. So that sets the day, that sets my intention for the day. And these are things that don't cost me anything. Anyone can do it. And that sort of wires my brain for success every morning. And it's true that the secret of success is in your daily habits. It's the truth. And for those that want the consistency, you can print out a 30-day habit tracker. I think there's free templates online. So I just have a 30-day habit tracker. There's sort of a reward section where you can reward yourself after the 30 days. You can have a friend that's sort of an accountability coach that you trust, or if you have the funds or finances to get a coach, then you could also work through that. So these are very inexpensive things that can be done in this day and age. It's just all about creating the habit and having sort of the willpower to see it through.
Yeah, I think resonating with that, Hannah, is the discipline. And you mentioned discipline early on when we were talking, and you just started off, is that discipline about putting these things in on a daily routine and a daily basis, so that we kind of, my experience is that we sometimes associate ourselves too much with what our minds say, and there's a whole lot more going on than just the stuff that's kind of rotating around here, right? And a lot of the reading that I've done and a lot of the work that I do is about recognizing the patterns that go on in the mind, and also accepting that my mind is not the whole me, right? So, and that's I think where a lot of that visualization and a lot of the morning work and a lot of the meditation, you talked about meditation, and that's a mechanism. That's a mechanism that I haven't done well, but I am beginning to build into my daily routine, and it's really, really helping. If I don't spend that time, the world gets too busy, and I immediately start to connect with the stuff that's going on here, and there's no gap. Do you know what I mean? And I think partly to reinforce for the listener the things that you have said, that the disciplines that you have just said, they cross different areas, right? So they're spiritual, they're habit tracking, they're about performance. Anybody who's in a recovery program practices those principles as well. So I would kind of encourage the listener to take what you can out of this. I suppose the question coming back to you, and I don't want to make any assumptions about your mindset. You've talked a lot about drive and purpose, but for anybody who's struggling with the routine of the discipline, right? What sort of things could they do in the moment on the day? If their mind is going, right, and it's starting to go, what do you think people could do just to draw that back in and create that inner space?
So that's why I do things immediately I wake up in the morning. I don't even get off my bed, because that's the easiest way to kind of create that habit. Like, you've woken up, okay, bam, I'm going to switch on a meditation, video, bam, I'm going to say something positive. I always say, today's going to be a great day, even just that. So you set the intention, like immediately you wake up. You don't give opportunity for anything to slip in. So you've got to kind of help yourself. I always see life like a garden, and you've kind of got to protect that garden, or your mind is a garden. You've got to take out the weeds. You've got to water it. You've got to refresh it. And people don't realize that brushing your teeth is a habit, but you do it every day. You do it unconsciously because you think, oh, it's not a habit, but it is a habit. You don't have to brush your teeth every day, but you do it every day. So if you can brush your teeth every day, you can say something positive in the morning. So I kind of link those two together.
Yeah, well said, well said. So Hannah, I think you've got a long list of stuff here, but if you had something that you would say to your younger self, knowing what you know now and what you have experienced, what would that be?
That is going to be okay. It will work out in the end. I started my company in my early 20s, and I had nothing. I was just driven, pure passion and drive. And it got to a point at times when I thought, God, is this going to work? Are you doing the right thing? And I used to take failure and rejection, a bit hard at that time. But yeah, you fell fast, fell early, fell quickly. Failure doesn't determine your success. Failure is success turned inside out. So, and I said that in my TED talk as well. So, it will be okay in the end. It will work out in the end. And you're not mad. You're definitely on the right track. And do more and be more. Yeah, for sure.
Be more. Love that. I will put in the show notes on the podcast, I'll put a link to the TED talk. Also, Hannah's book is on Amazon. I dare you, roll the dice of life. So have a look at that, and also check out youngladiesclub.com.
Hannah, I just wanted to jump in and just say that the time that we've spent together today, this morning, even though we've only just met, has been inspiring. It's inspiring, but it's been practical and helpful. And I would encourage our listeners to, maybe come to this podcast with a pen and paper, because there's some really, I've been noting down some tips here that I just think are really, really, really practical. So thank you for your time, Hannah. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much, Hannah.